Step into the arena of minds. On this channel, every move is a clash of strategy, every sacrifice a turning point, and every game a battle for glory. Watch two players push the limits of creativity and calculation, as we bring you the drama, suspense, and excitement of chess like never before. Lenderman opens with d4, advancing his pawn like a fearless scout staking the center, daring Wesley So to respond to his ambitious plans. Wesley counters with d5, planting a solid pawn like a rock wall, signaling he's ready to absorb the first blows and fight for control of the center. Lenderman pushes c4, striking at the center with a sharp thrust, inviting tension and promising an intricate battle over the critical squares. Wesley captures cx8-5, snapping off the pawn with measured precision, opening lines while keeping his structure resilient and flexible. Lenderman develops b4, sending his bishop to a commanding diagonal, eyeing key squares and preparing subtle pressure against black's setup. Wesley leaps and checks, activating his knight like a stealthy warrior, reinforcing central squares and preparing for swift counterplay. Lenderman supports the center with e3, consolidating his pawn structure and ensuring smooth development of his pieces toward an upcoming clash. Wesley counters with bf5, positioning his bishop aggressively, challenging the light squares and signaling readiness to fight back in the center. Lenderman moves qb3, gliding his queen like a prowling predator along the diagonal, threatening b7 and forcing black to react cautiously. Wesley replies c7, anchoring the queen defensively, keeping the b7 pawn secure while preparing to connect rooks for the coming struggle. Lenderman develops nc3, reinforcing control over d5 and readying his knight to jump into tactical skirmishes across the center. Wesley plays e6, creating a solid pawn chain and stabilizing the position, waiting patiently for the right moment to counterattack. Lenderman brings n3, developing quickly toward the center, connecting pieces and increasing the pressure on black's defensive setup. Wesley answers f6, shoring up key dark squares while slightly loosening his pawn structure, a bold choice signaling he's ready for complex tactical play. Lenderman advances a3, preventing knight or bishop incursions on b4, securing space and preparing queenside maneuvering. Wesley places rook8, aiming his rook at the c-file with precision, preparing for potential c-file clashes against white's structure. Lenderman maneuvers nd2, repositioning his knight like a tactical scout, looking to reroute to f3 or b3 to strengthen his camp. Wesley develops ng7, bringing another knight into defensive formation and ensuring rapid deployment for both central and kingside operations. Lenderman pushes h3, creating luft and stopping black's potential g4 expansion, a subtle but necessary precaution for his king's safety. Wesley charges g5, aggressively advancing his pawn to challenge white's kingside, signaling that the battle is about to ignite. Lenderman retreats his bishop to bh2, safely repositioning while keeping long-range pressure alive along the diagonal toward black's territory. Wesley responds bg6, placing his bishop on a commanding diagonal, eyeing white's central pawns and preparing to intensify the kingside pressure. Lenderman brings rook, aligning his rook on the open file, ready to contest the c-file and support queenside operations. Wesley moves kf7, boldly centralizing his king early, connecting his rooks and preparing for a full-scale middle-game fight. Lenderman repositions coup d'envoi, pulling his queen back to reinforce coordination, preparing to support both wings as the tension builds. Wesley plays cheeks, sliding his rook into an active post, contesting the c-file, and preparing for tactical exchanges on the queen's side. Lenderman expands with b3, building a defensive bastion on the queen's side to stabilize before black's rooks and knights converge. Wesley counters nx b5, capturing the intruding knight and clarifying queenside tensions, establishing control over key squares. Lenderman recaptures qx b5, his queen sweeping in to reclaim material while remaining active, probing weak spots in black's structure. Wesley shifts qc7, lining up his queen with the c-file, eyeing infiltration squares and threatening to coordinate with his rooks. 1 in. Lenderman pushes b4, advancing the pawn to secure space and challenge black's influence along the queen side, aiming to slow black's initiative. Wesley swings, rct2, placing his rook on the second rank with intent, preparing to invade white's territory and seize control of key files. Lenderman retreats nf1, pulling his knight back to guard critical squares and prepare defensive coverage before black's attack escalates. Wesley plants nd, advancing his knight to a central outpost, exerting maximum pressure and restricting white's tactical options. Lenderman slides k4, repositioning his queen to a safer square, while maintaining pressure along the long diagonal and keeping options for counterplay. Wesley strikes xb4, breaking open the queen side and exposing white's weaknesses, preparing to dominate with his rooks and knights. Lenderman recaptures qxbxb4, regaining material while keeping his queen active, attempting to maintain balance as black's pieces pressure the board. Wesley moves k7, centralizing his king like a battle commander, coordinating forces for the coming middle-game storm. Lenderman lifts r-bone, placing his rook on an active file to contest black's pressure, aiming to slow black's momentum before the invasion deepens. Wesley counters qc3, moving his queen into a prime attacking position, threatening tactical opportunities while keeping white on the defensive. Lenderman trades qxd3, eliminating the aggressive queen to relieve immediate pressure and simplify the position in a desperate maneuver. Wesley recaptures rxec3, dominating the open file with his rook, controlling key squares and keeping white's forces under tight restriction. Lenderman develops ndt2, activating his knight to contest key central squares and bolster defensive coordination across his camp. Wesley punishes with rxr3, sniping the a-pawn with precise force, widening structural weaknesses and increasing his control over the board. Lenderman moves kf1, stepping his king toward relative safety, preparing for defensive coordination in the face of black's growing domination. Wesley swings rat2, invading white's territory with a rook, threatening to paralyze the queenside defenses and control key files. Lenderman marches k1, retreating his king cautiously, while seeking coordination among remaining pieces in preparation for the middle game. Wesley pushes kd7, centralizing his king, ready to support advancing pawns and rooks, demonstrating complete command over the emerging battlefield. Lenderman plays nb3, positioning his knight to block infiltration and defend weak squares, trying to hold the line against black's coordinated army. Wesley advances b6, shoring up his queenside structure, preparing pawn breakthroughs and consolidating his domination across the board. Lenderman retreats in cone, repositioning his knight defensively, shoring up critical squares while preparing to challenge Black's growing influence. Wesley places Arc6, moving his rook into an optimal attacking position, ready to exert maximum pressure and transition seamlessly into the next phase of the battle. Lenderman leaps NB5, sending his knight forward like a daring raider, slashing into the queenside shadows and forcing Wesley to confront immediate tactical pressure. Wesley answers Engs B5, cutting down the invading knight with ruthless precision, clearing the tension on the queenside and tightening his grip on the dark squares. Lenderman recaptures QXBV5, his queen swooping in like a sharp blade, restoring material and probing deep into Wesley's position for any loose weaknesses. Wesley responds QC7, calmly aligning his queen with the c-file, preparing to reinforce his rooks and pressure White's stretched queenside structure. Lenderman pushes b4, shoving the pawn forward to gain space and steady his position, hoping to slow Wesley's growing momentum on the open files. Wesley fires RC2, a powerful rook infiltration that slashes into White's camp, threatening invasions on every rank and forcing Lenderman to scramble for defenses. Lenderman retreats NF1, pulling his knight back like a cautious guardian, trying to reinforce critical squares before Wesley's rook storm becomes overwhelming. Wesley plants N6, the knight jumping into a commanding central post, radiating pressure on every side and choking White's mobility with merciless accuracy. Lenderman slides K4, shifting his queen to a safer perch while eyeing counterplay along the diagonal, though Black's central grip remains heavy. Wesley strikes Xb4, tearing open the queenside with a violent pawn break, ripping apart White's shelter and inviting brutal rook activity. Lenderman recaptures QXB4, grabbing material while maintaining queen activity, though the cracks in his formation continue to widen under Black's assault. Wesley centralizes K7, stepping his king forward like a commander inspecting conquered ground, uniting his pieces for a smooth transition toward domination. Lenderman reinforces with Arbonne, placing his rook on the b-file to oppose Black's pressure, hoping to intercept the invasion before it becomes fatal. Wesley counters QC3, sliding his queen deep into enemy territory with cold intent, lining up tactical threats against White's weakened kingside and center. Lenderman trades with QX8-3, eliminating the invasive queen to relieve pressure, desperate to simplify before the position spins further out of control. Wesley recaptures RX8C3, his rook reclaiming the center with unstoppable force, dominating the board and keeping White tied down in every direction. Lenderman develops in DT2, bringing his knight forward to challenge the invading rook and stabilize collapsing squares across the queenside. Wesley punishes with RXA3, slicing off the A-pawn with surgical brutality, widening the structural damage and increasing the reach of his rooks. Lenderman moves KF1, shifting his king towards safety and central coordination, though Black's pieces still loom like predators ready to pounce. Wesley swings Ratwu, invading deep into White's territory with lethal intent, coordinating both rooks for a crushing assault that threatens to end the struggle. Lenderman plays Keone, pulling his king back toward the center in hopes of reorganizing his scattered defenses, though Black's twin rooks still carve through his position. Wesley tightens the vice with F5, advancing the pawn like a hammer blow, opening new lines, and preparing to unleash a decisive kingside breakthrough. Lenderman pushes g3, building a minimal shield to blunt the incoming pressure, though his pieces remain cramped and unable to challenge black's dominance. Wesley calmly continues g5, marching his pawn army forward with fearless intent, signaling that the kingside assault is no longer a threat but an inevitability. Lenderman answers h3, trying to halt the pawn storm before it reaches crushing force, yet every push seems only to reveal new weaknesses. Wesley drives foul, breaking through the kingside structure with a violent crack, opening lines straight toward the beleaguered white king. Lenderman responds ges foul, capturing out of necessity, though the resulting openings only widen the pathways black's rooks and knight are eager to exploit. Wesley recaptures gsf foul, ripping open the kingside completely as his pawn lunges forward, exposing white's king to a flood of tactical dangers. Lenderman seeks counterplay with Ketu, stepping his king into the open in desperation, hoping activity will compensate for his fractured defenses. Wesley improves nf5, repositioning his knight with surgical precision, aiming at key weak squares while tightening the net around the wandering white king. Lenderman pushes rb3, lifting his rook to contest the third rank and create counter-threats, though black's coordination remains far superior. Wesley tumbles n4 unleashing a sharp knight check that forces white into submission, exploiting the exposed king and centralizing his attack even further. Lenderman sidesteps kfone, scrambling for safety as he tries to dodge the cascading checks threatening to collapse his entire position. Wesley responds f3, thrusting the pawn deep like a spear, cracking open the kingside and stripping away the last shreds of white's protection. Lenderman plays kgon, retreating to the corner in a final attempt at shelter, though black's advancing forces continue closing in mercilessly. Wesley activates Rawon, swinging the rook across the board with unstoppable force, preparing lethal threats against the pinned and cornered monarch. Lenderman blocks with R-bone, interposing his rook as a desperate shield, hoping to delay black's unstoppable infiltration. Wesley calmly brings r3 at 2, reinforcing his rook duo and stacking threats along both ranks, leaving white with almost no defensive resources. Lenderman plays khdu, shuffling his king to the last available square, a lone figure surrounded by black's perfectly coordinated attackers. Wesley tightens the clamp with nf5, recentering the knight to keep all escape routes sealed, preparing the final approach toward decisive victory. Lenderman strikes with n4, throwing his knight forward in a final attempt to generate counterplay, hoping to disrupt black's perfect harmony before the position collapses. Wesley calmly replies f5, advancing the pawn with cold precision, tightening the net, and preparing to unleash unstoppable pressure on the cornered white king. Lenderman brings recon, shifting his rook to seek counterchances on the open file, though black's centralized pieces still maintain overwhelming coordination. Wesley continues h4, pushing the pawn deeper with ruthless momentum, prying open fresh lanes toward white's shattered kingside defenses. Lenderman plays rc2, doubling down on activity along the second rank, trying to contest black's rooks and offset the growing kingside threats. Wesley fires b5, inserting a precise bishop check that slices through the board, forcing new weaknesses in white's incomplete defensive formation. Lenderman blocks with kgon, stepping aside once more, though his squares grow fewer with each move and black's attack becomes increasingly inevitable. Wesley unleashes N4, planting the knight on a dominant outpost that strangles white's coordination and prepares devastating tactical breakthroughs. Lenderman answers RC4, using the rook as a barrier to slow the incoming force, though the initiative remains firmly in black's hands. Wesley tightens RBD2, sliding the rook into an even more invasive position, threatening to penetrate the second rank with decisive effect. Lenderman tries KFone, nudging his king forward in a desperate attempt to stay active, though safety remains a distant fantasy. Wesley responds D5, finally breaking open the center with a thunderous advance, converting his overwhelming piece activity into crashing central pressure. Lenderman snatches RX4, capturing the knight to reduce the tactical firepower, but his position remains dangerously exposed to black's rooks and bishop. Wesley recaptures BXD4, restoring material with tempo and keeping all lines aimed directly at the vulnerable king on F1A. Lenderman replies Ng5, hurling the knight forward toward active squares in hopes of counter threats, though black's control stays unbroken. Wesley pushes R-bone, delivering a forcing rook check that drives the white king deeper into a maze of threats, with no clear escape path. Lenderman blocks with R-cone, interposing once again to stall the assault, though the pieces barely hold together under the relentless pressure. Wesley shatters the defense with Rs-cuneo, sacrificing the exchange to rip open the last protective layer and expose the white king entirely. Lenderman accepts KX-cone, recapturing the rook as required, but his king stands naked in the center with attackers closing in from every angle. Wesley finishes RX-atvu, calmly scooping another pawn and establishing unstoppable connected passers, leaving white with no hope of containing the avalanche to come. Lenderman plays R8, sliding his rook along the back rank in a last-ditch effort to generate threats, though the position teeters on the brink with black dominating every critical square. Wesley advances H5, pushing his pawn forward with unstoppable intent, creating a new avenue of attack while keeping white's king trapped in a tightening vise. Lenderman tries Kgon, nudging his king toward any available shelter, desperately seeking safety as black's forces converge like predators circling prey. Wesley fires N4, planting the knight in a commanding central post, controlling escape squares and turning white's fragile defenses into mere illusions of resistance. Lenderman moves R-cone, repositioning the rook to contest open lines and attempt to delay the inevitable, though black's coordinated rooks and knight dominate the scene. Wesley plays ND-2-0, delivering a merciless check that forces white's king into further retreat, every move shrinking the already limited safe zone. Lenderman retreats Keone, stepping backward under relentless fire, hoping his king might survive one more round in this crushing endgame. Wesley pushes B3, sending the pawn surging forward like a battering ram, threatening unstoppable promotion and forcing white into an impossible defensive posture. Lenderman counters ND3, placing his knight to block the advancing pawn, a desperate act of resistance against an almost unstoppable march toward victory. Wesley advances B2, pushing the pawn to the brink of promotion, its mere presence a looming menace that demands immediate attention and dominates the board's narrative. Lenderman plays R8, shifting his rook along the back rank to attack the pawn and hold defensive hopes, though the position continues to collapse under black's coordination. Wesley answers Ratwu, swinging his rook into a dominant position, threatening both the advancing pawn and white's king, forcing every piece to react defensively. Lenderman captures nxpd2, sacrificing his knight in a desperate attempt to eliminate the unstoppable pawn, a final act of bravery on a rapidly sinking battlefield. Wesley recaptures rxpd2, restoring material balance while maintaining overwhelming pressure, his rooks poised to dominate and crush white's defenses entirely. Lenderman moves r8, trying to contest the c-file and create counterplay, though the initiative remains firmly and fatally in black's hands. Wesley plays Ratwu, positioning his rook with unrelenting precision, preparing the final combination that will leave white's king completely exposed. Lenderman attempts re8, stretching his rook to generate last-moment threats, though the pieces are scattered and coordination is impossible against black's dominating forces. Wesley calmly marches kb5, advancing his king with unstoppable support for his pawns, bringing every unit into perfect harmony for the final assault. Lenderman retreats r-pawn, trying once more to create resistance, a final desperate move in a position where every option has been exhausted. Wesley pushes g4, advancing the pawn like a battering ram that tears open the last remaining defensive lines, sealing white's fate and leaving the king completely vulnerable. Lenderman retreats r-pawn, desperately trying to regroup his rook, but black's forces dominate every escape route, leaving white with no tactical options and mounting fear. Wesley plays n4, positioning his knight centrally with terrifying precision, controlling all critical squares, and turning white's fragile defenses into a hopeless trap. Lenderman moves r-pawn again, repeating defensive gestures in a futile attempt to slow the impending disaster, though black's coordination leaves no room for miracles. Wesley advances g4, pushing his pawn like a war machine, ripping open the last lines around white's king and tightening the unbreakable net. Lenderman retreats r-pawn once more, his rook unable to prevent the coming storm. Every square his king could flee to is under the shadow of black's relentless pieces. Wesley concludes n4, planting the knight like a final banner of victory in white's camp, sealing the domination, leaving Lenderman's king exposed, and claiming total control. That's the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really motivates me to bring you even more exciting chess games. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.